The blizzard that swept through Casa Grande, Arizona in January of 1884 was the kind of freak storm that old-timers would talk about for decades. The kind that shouldn't have happened, but did, transforming the dusty desert town into a frozen wasteland overnight and leaving Juliana Garcia shivering in a borrowed cotton dress at a stranger's door, begging for work she knew would cost her everything. She had been traveling from Tucson with her father and younger brother when the storm hit, an unseasonable cold snap that brought snow and ice to a landscape more accustomed to scorching heat. The wagon had overturned on the frozen road, and in the chaos that followed, her father had struck his head on a rock. He died before the sun set, his last words a whispered prayer that Juliana would take care of her brother. Miguel was only 10, too young to understand that their lives had just shattered like the ice forming on the cacti around them. With her father's body barely cold in the frozen ground of the Casa Grande cemetery and exactly $3 to her name, Juliana stood at the back entrance of the Whitmore mansion, the largest house in town, built by a railroad magnate who had made his fortune connecting the Arizona Territory to the rest of the growing nation. Her hands were raw and red from cold, her black hair whipping around her face in the bitter wind. When the housekeeper opened the door, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hutchins, Juliana straightened her spine and tried to look capable instead of desperate. "I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts," Juliana said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I need work. I have a younger brother to feed." Mrs. Hutchins looked her up and down with eyes that had seen too many desperate women to be moved by one more. "We have enough help." "Try the boarding house, please." The word escaped before Juliana could stop it, and she hated the sound of it, hated the weakness it revealed. "The storm took everything. I will work harder than anyone you have. I will work for room and board for both of us, and whatever small wage you think fair." Something shifted in the older woman's expression, not quite sympathy but perhaps recognition of someone who had once stood in similar shoes. "Come in before you freeze to death. I will speak to Mrs. Whitmore, but I promise nothing." That had been 3 weeks ago, and Juliana had learned quickly that winter had not just taken her father. It had taken her freedom, her dignity, and any hope she had of controlling her own destiny. Mrs. Whitmore had agreed to take her on, but the terms were harsh. Juliana and Miguel would share a tiny room in the attic, barely larger than a closet, and Juliana would work from before dawn until after the family retired at night. Her wages were a pittance, barely enough to buy Miguel new shoes when his old ones wore through. The work itself was backbreaking. Juliana scrubbed floors, hauled water, emptied chamber pots, polished silver until her fingers ached, and stood for hours in the hot kitchen helping the cook prepare elaborate meals for the Whitmore family and their endless stream of guests. Mrs. Whitmore was a cold woman who found fault with everything, who seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out every small imperfection in Juliana's work. The other servants, resentful of having to share their already cramped quarters and meager resources, treated her with barely concealed hostility. But Juliana endured because she had no choice. Miguel needed food, shelter, and safety. He needed to go to the small school that the priest ran in town. He needed a chance at a better life than the one their father's death had thrust upon them. So Juliana swallowed her pride, bit her tongue when Mrs. Whitmore criticized her, and worked until her body screamed for rest. It was on a bright February morning, when the freak winter storm had finally passed, and the desert was returning to its normal dry warmth, that Juliana first saw Benjamin Easton. She was beating rugs in the yard behind the kitchen, clouds of dust rising with each strike of her paddle, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Through the dust, she saw 3 riders coming up the path that led to the Whitmore stables. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders outlined against the brilliant blue sky. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, sturdy canvas pants, a worn leather vest over a chambray shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. But there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that suggested he was more than just another ranch hand. Juliana turned back to her work, knowing better than to be caught staring. Mrs. Hutchins had made it clear that Juliana was to be invisible when the family had guests, to do her work and disappear like smoke. But she could not help glancing up again as the riders dismounted, and for just a moment, the man in the lead looked directly at her. His eyes were a striking pale blue, like ice reflecting sunlight, and his face was tanned and weathered from years in the harsh Arizona sun. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. When their eyes met, something passed between them, a spark of recognition that had nothing to do with actually knowing each other, and everything to do with seeing another human being as something more than just a role or a station in life. Then Mrs. Hutchins was calling sharply from the kitchen door, and Juliana dropped her gaze, returning to her rugs with renewed vigor, her heart beating faster than the exertion warranted. That evening, as Juliana served dinner to the Whitmore family and their guests in the formal dining room, she learned that the cowboy's name was Benjamin Easton. He owned a ranch about 20 miles outside of Casa Grande, a spread that he had built up from nothing over the past 8 years. He was in town to negotiate with Mr. Whitmore about a contract to supply beef to the railroad workers who were extending the line further south. "Your reputation precedes you, Easton," Mr. Whitmore said, cutting into his steak with obvious satisfaction. "They say you run the tightest operation in the territory. Never lost a head of cattle to rustlers. Never had a man quit your employ with complaints." Benjamin's voice, when he answered, was low and measured, with a slight Texas drawl that suggested origins further east. "I treat my men fair and my cattle well. Seems to me that is just good business sense." "And what about the Apache troubles, Mrs. Whitmore asked, her voice sharp with the fear that still gripped many white settlers, despite the fact that most of the Apache had been forced onto reservations years before. "They say there are still renegades in the mountains." "I've had no trouble," Benjamin replied. "I respect their land and their ways when our paths cross. Most conflicts come from misunderstanding and disrespect." Juliana, pouring water into crystal glasses, felt her estimation of this man rise. It was rare to hear an Anglo speak of the Apache with anything other than contempt or fear. Her own grandmother had been Apache, and though Juliana's father had raised her in the Mexican Catholic tradition, she had always felt the pull of that heritage, that connection to the land that ran deeper than property lines or territorial boundaries. As she moved around the table, refilling glasses and replacing empty serving dishes with full ones, she was acutely aware of Benjamin's presence. He did not treat her as invisible the way the Whitmores did. When she reached to pour his water, he said, "Thank you," quietly, and when their eyes met again, she saw that same spark, that same recognition. The dinner seemed to last forever, course after elaborate course, while Juliana's feet ached and her arms grew heavy from carrying trays. But finally it was over, and the men retired to Mr. Whitmore's study for brandy and cigars, while Mrs. Whitmore went to her sitting room. Juliana and the other servants cleared the table, washed the mountains of dishes, and cleaned the kitchen until it was spotless. It was nearly midnight when Juliana finally climbed the narrow stairs to the attic room she shared with Miguel. Her brother was already asleep, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his face peaceful in a way that made her heart ache. She had managed to keep him safe, fed, and in school. That was what mattered. Her own exhaustion, her own dreams of something more, were luxuries she could not afford. But that night, as she lay on her narrow cot and listened to the wind rattling the loose shingles on the roof, she allowed herself to think about Benjamin Easton. About the way he had looked at her, really looked at her, as if she was a person worthy of notice. About his quiet voice and his respectful words about the Apache. About the strength in his shoulders and the competence in the way he handled his horse. Then she pushed the thoughts away, angry at herself for such foolishness. Men like Benjamin Easton did not see women like her as anything but servants. The gulf between a ranch owner and a housemaid was as wide as the desert itself, and twice as impossible to cross. She needed to focus on survival, not on impossible dreams. The next morning brought a crisis that shattered the routine of the household. Miguel, who had seemed fine when he left for school, was brought home at midday by Father Ramirez, the priest who ran the school. The boy was burning with fever, his small body shaking with chills despite the warm February sunshine. He collapsed during lessons, Father Ramirez explained, his weathered face creased with concern. I think it may be influenza. There have been several cases in town. Mrs. Whitmore's reaction was immediate and cold. Get him out of my house. I will not have sickness spreading to my family. Juliana felt her world tilt. Please, Mrs. Whitmore, he just needs rest. I will care for him. He will not come near your family. I said get him out, Mrs. Whitmore's voice was ice. If you choose to go with him, then you forfeit your position here. Make your choice. There was no choice, not really. Juliana gathered Miguel's burning body in her arms, collected their few possessions from the attic room, and walked out of the Whitmore mansion with her head high and her heart breaking. She had $3 to her name, a sick brother, and nowhere to go. The boarding house would not take them, not with Miguel obviously ill. The doctor wanted payment upfront that Juliana could not provide. Father Ramirez offered the small room behind the church, but it was already occupied by a family who had lost their home in the winter storm. As the afternoon wore on and Miguel's fever climbed higher, Juliana felt panic setting in. She was sitting on a bench outside the general store, Miguel's head in her lap, trying to decide whether to use her $3 for medicine or for food, when a shadow fell across them. She looked up to find Benjamin Easton standing there, his pale blue eyes serious. I heard what happened at the Whitmore place, he said without preamble. That woman has a heart like a stone. Juliana straightened, pride making her voice sharp. We will be fine. We do not need charity. Did not figure you for the type who would. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with her, and gently touched Miguel's forehead. But your brother needs a doctor and medicine, and you need a place to stay. I am not offering charity. I am offering work. What kind of work? Juliana asked, suspicious. She had heard stories about what men sometimes expected from desperate women. Benjamin seemed to read her thoughts because a flash of something that might have been hurt crossed his face. The kind that involves cooking for ranch hands, mending clothes, keeping the house clean. My housekeeper quit last month to move back east with her daughter, and I have been making do with burned beans and dust. You said at the Whitmore place that you could cook, clean, and sew. I need those skills. In return, you and your brother get a room, 3 meals a day, and a fair wage, nothing else. Just honest work for honest pay. Juliana searched his face, looking for the lie, the hidden expectation, but his pale eyes were steady and direct. Why would you help us? You do not know us. Because I know what it is like to have nothing and no one to turn to, Benjamin said simply. And because treating people fairly is the right thing to do. Now, do you want to sit here arguing while your brother burns up with fever, or do you want to let me get you both to my ranch where the doctor can see him? She made her decision. We will come, but I work for what we receive. No charity. Would not have it any other way. Benjamin stood and scooped Miguel up in his arms as if the boy weighed nothing. My wagon is just down the street. Can you manage your things? Juliana grabbed their small bundle and followed him, her mind spinning. This could be a terrible mistake. She knew nothing about this man, except that he had kind eyes and a respectful manner. But Miguel needed help now, and Benjamin Easton was offering a lifeline when everyone else had turned their backs. The ride to the ranch took over an hour, the wagon rolling through desert landscape dotted with saguaro cacti and creosote bushes. Benjamin drove in silence, his attention on the rough road, while Juliana held Miguel and tried to get him to sip water. The boy's fever had not broken, and his skin felt like fire against her hands. When they finally reached the ranch, Juliana was surprised by what she saw. She had expected something rough and temporary, the kind of setup many cowboys maintained. Instead, Benjamin's ranch was a proper homestead with a solid two-story house built of adobe and timber, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the sparse desert vegetation. I will send one of my men for the doctor, Benjamin said, carrying Miguel into the house. In the meantime, let us get him into bed. The inside of the house was as surprising as the outside. It was clean but obviously neglected, with dust on the furniture and dishes piled in the kitchen. Benjamin carried Miguel upstairs to a small bedroom with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out over the desert. He laid the boy gently on the bed, then stepped back. I will get some cool water and cloths, he said. You try to get him comfortable. Over the next several hours, Juliana learned that Benjamin Easton was a man of his word. He sent his foreman, a grizzled man named Hank Peterson, to fetch the doctor from Casa Grande. He brought water, cloths, and a fever remedy that he said his mother had always used. He even helped Juliana sponge Miguel's burning skin, his large hands surprisingly gentle. When the doctor finally arrived, he confirmed that Miguel had influenza, but said the boy was young and strong and should recover with rest and care. He left medicine and instructions, refusing payment when Benjamin tried to press money into his hand. You delivered my wife's baby last year when I could not get her to town in time, the doctor said. Consider this repayment. After the doctor left and Miguel had finally fallen into a more peaceful sleep, Juliana found Benjamin in the kitchen, making coffee. She stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. The adrenaline that had carried her through the crisis was fading, leaving her exhausted and aware that she was alone in a strange house with a man she barely knew. Benjamin looked up and seemed to understand. There is a lock on your bedroom door, he said quietly. I will be sleeping downstairs in my room. My men all stay in the bunkhouse. You and your brother are safe here, I give you my word. Why are you doing this? Juliana asked, the question that had been burning in her since he found her outside the general store. You do not know us. We are nothing to you. Benjamin was silent for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. 8 years ago, I came to Arizona with nothing but a horse, a saddle, and a dream of building something of my own. I had grown up dirt poor in Texas, the youngest of 6 children. My father drank away what little money we had, and my mother worked herself to death trying to keep us fed. When I was 18, I headed west looking for a better life. He paused, his blue eyes distant with memory. I nearly died that first year. Got sick with fever, much like your brother. I was working at a ranch outside of Tucson, and the owner could have thrown me out, left me to die. Instead, he nursed me back to health, gave me time to recover. He said that we are all put on this earth to help each other, and that kindness is never wasted. When he died, he left me some money in his will, enough to buy my first head of cattle and stake a claim on this land. He looked at Juliana directly. I learned from him that the measure of a person is not in how much they accumulate, but in what they do for others when they have the power to help. You needed help. I could provide it. It is as simple as that. Juliana felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee he handed her. I will work hard for you, I promise. I believe you. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him look younger. Now you should rest. Your brother will likely sleep through the night with that medicine the doctor left. Tomorrow is soon enough to discuss your duties. But Juliana could not rest, not yet. She moved through the dusty house, taking stock of what needed to be done. The kitchen was a disaster, with pots crusted with the remains of poorly cooked meals and a floor that looked like it had not been swept in weeks. The sitting room was furnished with decent pieces, but covered in dust and neglect. She found the room that Benjamin had indicated was his, a simple space with a large bed and not much else, and was reassured to see that it was indeed on the ground floor, far from where she and Miguel would sleep. That night, lying next to Miguel and listening to his labored breathing gradually ease, Juliana allowed herself to feel something that had been absent since the blizzard took her father: hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she and Miguel could build a life. Not as charity cases, but as valued workers. Not as servants to be looked down upon, but as people with dignity and worth. The next morning, Miguel's fever had broken, and though he was weak, his eyes were clear when he woke. Juliana fed him the broth that Benjamin had somehow managed to make without burning it, then settled him back to sleep. Then she went downstairs and got to work. By the time Benjamin came in from the morning chores, Juliana had cleaned the kitchen until it shone, baked fresh bread, and had beans and salt pork simmering on the stove. The smell of coffee filled the house, rich and strong. "Good Lord," Benjamin said, stopping in the kitchen doorway and staring. I had forgotten what a clean kitchen looked like. Juliana wiped her hands on the apron she had found hanging on a hook. "This is just the beginning. Your house needs a thorough cleaning, your clothes need mending, and from what I saw in your pantry, you need someone to do proper shopping in town. You have been living like a bachelor too long." "Yes, madam," Benjamin said, but there was amusement in his voice. "I can see I am in for a reckoning." Over the next few weeks, Juliana transformed Benjamin's house. She scrubbed, polished, mended, and organized until every room gleamed. She learned to cook for the ranch hands, hearty meals that brought appreciation and actual compliments from men who were used to their own poor attempts at food. She made curtains for the windows, planted herbs in pots near the kitchen door, and somehow made the bachelor ranch house feel like a home. Miguel recovered fully and became a fixture around the ranch, following the cowboys and learning about horses and cattle. Benjamin treated the boy with patience and kindness, teaching him to ride and taking time to answer his endless questions. Juliana watched them together and felt her heart warming in ways that frightened her, because the truth was, she was falling in love with Benjamin Easton. It was impossible not to. He was unfailingly kind but never condescending. He treated her as an equal, asking her opinion on household matters and listening when she spoke. He paid her the wage he had promised, every week without fail, and never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond her labor. But it was the small things that really captured her heart. The way he always said thank you when she served him meals. The way he brought her wildflowers from the desert when he came in from riding. The way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. The way he smiled at her jokes and listened to her stories about her father and her life before the blizzard. One evening in late March, after supper had been served and cleaned up and Miguel had been sent to bed, Benjamin asked Juliana to sit with him on the porch. The desert sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air was finally cooling after the heat of the day. "I want to talk to you about something," Benjamin said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that Juliana had never heard before. "I have been thinking about this for weeks, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve." Juliana felt her heart begin to race. "What is it?" Benjamin turned to face her, his pale blue eyes intense in the fading light. "You have been here almost 2 months now, and in that time this house has become a home, not just because it is cleaner or the food is better, though both those things are true, but because you are in it. You and Miguel have brought life and warmth and joy to a place that was just walls and roof before." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "I am saying this all wrong. What I mean is, I have fallen in love with you, Juliana. I love your strength and your pride and the way you care for your brother. I love your laugh and your stubbornness and the way you look at the world. I love the way you have made this place feel like somewhere worth coming home to." Juliana's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, but the words would not come. Benjamin continued, his voice gaining strength. "I know the circumstances that brought you here were not ideal. I know you came because you were desperate and I offered help. But I hope that over these weeks, you have seen that I am a decent man who would treat you right. I am asking if you think you could ever feel for me what I feel for you, because if there is a chance, I would like to court you properly. I would like to see if we could build something together, not as employer and employee, but as equals, as partners." Juliana found her voice finally, though it shook with emotion. "You are asking if I could love you?" "Yes," Benjamin said simply. "Then you should know that I already do," Juliana said, and watched his face transform with joy. "I have been falling in love with you since that first dinner at the Whitmore house when you treated me like a person instead of a servant. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you treat everyone with respect, from your ranch hands to my little brother. I love the life you have built here and the man you are, but I am afraid." "Of what?" Benjamin asked, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Of losing this," Juliana said honestly. "Of losing you. I lost my mother when I was young and then my father. I lost my home and my security. I am afraid that if I let myself hope for this, for us, something will happen to take it away." Benjamin raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I cannot promise that life will not bring challenges, but I can promise that whatever comes, we will face it together. I can promise to treat you with love and respect every day of our lives. I can promise to care for Miguel as if he were my own brother. And I can promise to work every day to be worthy of your love." Tears spilled down Juliana's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. "Then yes, I would very much like for you to court me." Benjamin pulled her into his arms and Juliana rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. The desert stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, and for the first time since that terrible blizzard, Juliana felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The courtship that followed was sweet and proper. Benjamin took Juliana into town on Sundays after church, buying her lunch at the hotel restaurant and walking with her through the dusty streets. He brought her small gifts, a carved wooden comb, a book of poetry, a shawl in her favorite shade of blue. He treated her like a queen, opening doors and helping her into the wagon and making sure she knew that he valued her opinion and her presence. The ranch hands noticed the change and approved. Hank, the foreman, told Juliana one day that he had never seen Benjamin so happy. "That man has worked himself to the bone building this place," Hank said, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "It is good to see him take time for something other than cattle and horses." Miguel, too, was thrilled. He adored Benjamin and had already started calling him Ben like the other ranch hands did. The boy was thriving at the ranch, growing stronger and more confident. He had started attending school in Casa Grande again, riding in with Benjamin when he went to town on business. But not everyone was pleased with the developing relationship. Mrs. Whitmore, when she saw Juliana and Benjamin together in town, made her disapproval clear with cutting remarks and cold stares. Other women in Casa Grande, women who had set their caps at the eligible rancher, looked at Juliana with resentment. "Let them talk," Benjamin said when Juliana expressed concern. "I know who you are and what you are worth. Anyone who has a problem with us courting can take their opinions elsewhere." In April, Benjamin took Juliana to meet his neighbors, the Morrison family, who ran a ranch about 15 miles to the north. Daniel Morrison and his wife Clara had 2 young children and had become close friends with Benjamin over the years. Clara welcomed Juliana warmly, clearly delighted that Benjamin had found someone. "I have been telling him for years that he needed a good woman," Clara said, pouring tea in her sunny kitchen while the men talked business outside. "A man should not live alone like he has been doing." "I did not exactly have marriage in mind when I came to his ranch," Juliana admitted. "I was just desperate for work." Clara's eyes were kind. "Sometimes the best things in life come when we are not looking for them. Daniel was my older brother's friend, and I thought he was annoying when I was young. Then one day I looked at him and saw him differently. Love has a way of surprising us." As spring turned to summer, Benjamin and Juliana grew closer. They talked for hours on the porch in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Benjamin told her about growing up poor in Texas, about the hard years of building his ranch, about his plans to expand his herd, and maybe one day have the biggest operation in the territory. Juliana told him about her childhood in Mexico, about her mother's death when she was 12, about her father's decision to move them to Arizona for work. She told him about her grandmother's Apache heritage and the stories the old woman had told before she died. She told him about the pain of losing her father and the fear of those first days when she thought she might lose Miguel too. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," Benjamin said one evening, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. "You have been through so much, but you never gave up. You protected your brother and kept going even when everything seemed impossible." "I did what I had to do," Juliana said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Benjamin said firmly. "Not everyone has that kind of strength. It is one of the things I love most about you." In late June, Benjamin took Juliana into Casa Grande to visit the jeweler. Her heart was pounding as they walked into the small shop because she knew what this meant. Benjamin had told her the night before that he wanted to marry her, that he wanted her to be his wife in truth, not just in his heart. "Pick any ring you like," Benjamin said, gesturing to the display case full of rings with gold bands and precious stones. "Nothing is too good for you." But Juliana's eye was drawn to a simpler ring, a gold band with a single small turquoise stone. "That one," she said. "It reminds me of the Arizona sky." Benjamin bought the ring, and that evening in front of Miguel and the ranch hands who had become like family, He got down on one knee in the dusty ranch yard and asked Juliana to marry him. She said yes through tears of joy, and the ranch hands cheered and Hank produced a bottle of whiskey for toasts. They set the wedding for August, giving Juliana time to prepare and to have a dress made. Clara Morrison insisted on helping, and together they created a beautiful gown of ivory lace and satin that made Juliana feel like the Queen Benjamin always said she was. The wedding took place in the small church in Casa Grande, with Father Ramirez officiating. Miguel served as Benjamin's best man, bursting with pride in his new suit. Clara stood up for Juliana, and the church was packed with ranch hands, neighbors, and townspeople who had come to respect the quiet rancher and his strong, graceful bride. When Juliana walked down the aisle on Hank's arm, since she had no father to give her away, she saw Benjamin waiting at the altar, and the look on his face took her breath away. There was love there, pure and deep, and a joy that matched her own. "You are so beautiful," Benjamin whispered when she reached him, and Juliana felt tears prick her eyes. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows in Spanish and English, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they lived. When Father Ramirez pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed Juliana with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and precious. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food and music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Juliana danced with her new husband, with Miguel, with the ranch hands who had become her friends. She accepted congratulations from Clara and Daniel, from the doctor who had saved Miguel, from Father Ramirez who had tried to help them when they had nowhere to go. Even some of the townspeople who had been skeptical of the match seemed won over by the obvious love between the newlyweds. Only Mrs. Whitmore, who had somehow gotten herself invited by her husband who did business with Benjamin, remained coldly disapproving. But Juliana found she did not care. She was married to the man she loved, surrounded by people who cared for her, and her brother was safe and happy. Mrs. Whitmore's opinion meant nothing. That night, in the bedroom that was now theirs, Benjamin undressed Juliana slowly, reverently, telling her between kisses how much he loved her, how long he had dreamed of this moment. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a claiming and a giving all at once, and afterward, Juliana lay in Benjamin's arms feeling complete in a way she had never known was possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Do not be frightened," Benjamin said, his lips against her hair. "I will love you until the day I die and every day after if God grants it. You are my wife, my partner, my heart. Nothing will ever change that." The months that followed were the happiest of Juliana's life. She threw herself into being a ranch wife, not just keeping the house but learning about the business side of ranching. Benjamin taught her about breeding cattle, about market prices, about managing the books. He trusted her judgment and often asked her advice on decisions. Miguel continued to thrive, growing taller and stronger. Benjamin formally adopted him in October, giving the boy his last name and making him a legal part of the family. Miguel cried when Benjamin told him, and so did Juliana, overwhelmed by her husband's generosity and love. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Benjamin expanded the herd, and Juliana suggested they also start raising horses, which could be sold to the army and to other ranchers. Her idea proved profitable, and by the end of the year, the Easton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. In December, Juliana discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor confirmed it, she felt a rush of joy mixed with terror. She wanted this baby desperately, but she could not forget her mother dying in childbirth, could not forget the risks. Benjamin's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, spinning her around until she begged him to stop before she got dizzy. Then he became immediately protective, insisting she rest more, that she not lift anything heavy, that she take care of herself and their child. "Benjamin, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Juliana laughed. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "But this is my baby," Benjamin said, his hand splaying across her still flat stomach. "My child with the woman I love more than life. Forgive me if I want to make sure you are both safe." Juliana kissed him, touched by his concern. "We will be fine. I am strong and we have the doctor nearby. Do not worry so much." But as her pregnancy progressed, Juliana found herself grateful for Benjamin's protectiveness. There were days when she was exhausted, when her body ached and her emotions were all over the place. Benjamin was endlessly patient, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her when she cried for no reason, bringing her the strange foods she suddenly craved. Miguel was excited about becoming an uncle and made plans for all the things he would teach the baby. Clara Morrison visited regularly, sharing advice and reassurance from her own experiences. The ranch hands treated Juliana like fragile china, rushing to help with anything she tried to do. "I've created a bunch of mother hens," Juliana complained to Benjamin one evening in March, when she was 7 months along and feeling huge and ungainly. "They love you," Benjamin said simply. "We all do. Is it so wrong that we want to take care of you?" "No," Juliana admitted, settling into his arms. "It just feels strange sometimes. I am so used to being the one who takes care of others." "Now it is your turn to be cared for," Benjamin said, kissing the top of her head. "Get used to it because I plan to spoil you for the rest of our lives." The baby came in early May, on a warm morning when the desert was in bloom after the spring rains. Juliana's labor started just after dawn, and Benjamin sent immediately for the doctor and for Clara, then refused to leave Juliana's side despite Clara's insistence that childbirth was women's work. "She is my wife," Benjamin said firmly. "I am staying." Juliana was grateful for his presence. The pain was intense, worse than anything she had imagined, and there were moments when she was convinced she would die just like her mother had. But Benjamin held her hand and wiped her face with cool cloths and told her she was strong, that she could do this, that he loved her. After 8 hours of labor, their son was born, red-faced and screaming and perfect. The doctor placed him on Juliana's chest, and she looked down at the tiny face and felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "A boy," Benjamin said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have a son. What should we name him?" Juliana asked, looking up at her husband with tears streaming down her face. Benjamin touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression filled with wonder. "I always thought if I had a son, I would name him after the man who saved my life and taught me about kindness. His name was Samuel." "Samuel James. What do you think?" "Samuel Easton," Juliana said, testing the name. "I love it. Samuel James Easton." Their son was healthy and strong, and he looked like a perfect blend of both parents with Juliana's dark hair and Benjamin's blue eyes. Miguel was enchanted with his nephew and took his duties as uncle very seriously, always wanting to help with the baby. The months after Samuel's birth were exhausting but joyful. Juliana learned to manage motherhood along with her other responsibilities, though Benjamin insisted on hiring another woman from town to help with the housework, so Juliana could focus on the baby. Little Samuel was a good baby, sleeping well and eating eagerly, growing plump and healthy. In August, on their first wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Juliana with a gift, a beautiful black mare with a gentle temperament, perfect for a woman who had rarely had the chance to ride. "I want you to have something that is just yours," Benjamin said, helping Juliana up into the saddle. "Something that represents your freedom and your strength." Juliana named the mare Luna, and often in the early mornings before the baby woke, she would ride out into the desert with Benjamin, the two of them racing across the open land, free and wild and gloriously alive. Life settled into a rhythm of work and love and family. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to build a new barn and hire more hands. Miguel, now 14, was talking about wanting to go to school in Tucson when he was older, maybe even becoming a lawyer. Benjamin encouraged him, setting aside money for his education. In the spring of 1887, when Samuel was almost 2, Juliana discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was not carrying the fear and worry she had the first time. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Catherine, was born in November during a spectacular desert sunset. "Now we have one of each," Benjamin said, holding his tiny daughter with a tenderness that made Juliana's heart swell. "Our family is complete," but their family grew in unexpected ways. In the summer of 1888, Benjamin hired a young cowboy named Jack who mentioned that his widowed mother was struggling to make ends meet on a small farm near Tucson. When Benjamin and Juliana went to visit and assess the situation, they found a proud woman named Margaret who was trying to work land that was slowly failing. "Come work for us," Juliana suggested. "We need help in the house with the children, and you could live here on the ranch where you would have security." Margaret accepted, bringing her 17-year-old daughter Amy with her. The two women became part of the family, with Margaret managing the household and Amy helping with the children and learning about ranching. Within a year, Amy had fallen in love with one of the ranch hands, a steady young man named Thomas, and they married in a ceremony at the ranch that reminded everyone of Benjamin and Juliana's own wedding. Miguel went off to school in Tucson in 1889, brilliant and determined to make something of himself. He wrote letters home regularly, telling them about his studies and thanking Benjamin for giving him this opportunity. Juliana cried when he left, but was fiercely proud of the young man her little brother had become. The years passed in a blur of work and love, and the everyday joys and challenges of family life. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Rose was bright and fearless, equally comfortable in the barn or the kitchen. In 1891, Juliana gave birth to another son whom they named David, and 2 years later, a second daughter, Grace. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Benjamin building additional rooms and a proper second floor. What had once been a bachelor's rough quarters had become a real home, filled with the sounds of children laughing, with the smells of Juliana's cooking, with the warmth of love lived every day. Through it all, through the busy days and the exhausting nights, through sick children and difficult seasons, through droughts and floods and all the challenges that ranch life brought, Benjamin and Juliana's love remained the foundation of everything. They still made time to sit together on the porch in the evenings, still talked for hours about their dreams and plans, still looked at each other with the same spark of recognition and desire that had been there from the beginning. On their 10th wedding anniversary in August 1896, Benjamin took Juliana back to Casa Grande, to the church where they had married. They renewed their vows with Father Ramirez, who was now an old man but still remembered the desperate young woman who had come to him for help and the quiet cowboy who had given her a new life. "You two are a testament to the power of love and kindness," Father Ramirez said, blessing them. "You have built something beautiful together, not just this family but this life of generosity and compassion. You help others the way Benjamin once helped you, Juliana. That is the true measure of a blessed life." After the ceremony, they walked through town, and Juliana was struck by how much had changed. Casa Grande was bigger now, more developed with new buildings and more people. The Whitmore mansion still stood, though Mr. Whitmore had died 2 years ago and his widow had moved back east. The old boarding house where Juliana had once been turned away was now a hotel. "Do you ever think about that winter?" Benjamin asked as they walked. "About how different things could have been?" "Every day," Juliana admitted. "If that blizzard had not come, my father would still be alive, and Miguel and I would have gone on to wherever we were heading. I would never have met you. I would never have had this life." She paused, looking up at her husband, this good man who had changed everything. "I miss my father terribly." "I always will. But I cannot regret how things turned out because it brought me to you. Is that terrible?" "No," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "It is honest. We cannot change the past, but we can honor it by living well, by being grateful for what we have been given, by passing on the kindness we have received." They returned to the ranch to find their children playing in the yard, supervised by Margaret and Amy. Samuel, now 11, was teaching 5-year-old David how to rope a fence post. Rose, at 8, was helping 3-year-old Grace pick wildflowers. The scene was so perfectly ordinary and yet so precious that Juliana felt tears sting her eyes. "This is what I dreamed of," Benjamin said quietly, his arm around her waist. "When I was young and poor and had nothing, I used to dream of having a family, a home, a place where I belonged. You gave me that, Juliana. You gave me everything." "You gave me a crown," Juliana said, remembering something he had said to her years ago when they were courting. He had told her that she moved through the world like a queen even when she was scrubbing floors, and that someday he would make sure everyone else saw it too. "You took a desperate woman who had been made a servant by circumstances, and you treated her like royalty. You made me believe I was worthy of love and respect and happiness." "You were always worthy," Benjamin said. "I just helped you see it." That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Juliana and Benjamin sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The desert stretched out before them, vast and beautiful under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, they could hear the gentle lowing of cattle and the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "I want to expand the horse operation," Juliana said, her head resting on Benjamin's shoulder. "I think we could breed horses specifically for endurance in desert conditions. There is a market for that with the military and with other ranchers." "All right," Benjamin said. "What do you need from me to make it happen?" This was how they had always worked, as true partners. Juliana came up with ideas and Benjamin supported them, just as Benjamin made decisions and Juliana advised him. They had built this ranch together, this family together, this life together. "I love you," Juliana said, the words she had said thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "And I you," Benjamin said, kissing her temple, "always and forever." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. Miguel graduated from school and became a lawyer, opening a practice in Tucson that focused on helping small farmers and ranchers navigate the complex web of territorial and federal law. He married a teacher named Anna, and they had 3 children whom Juliana spoiled shamelessly whenever they visited. Samuel, when he turned 18, announced that he wanted to go east to study business and economics. Benjamin was disappointed, having hoped his oldest son would take over the ranch, but Juliana reminded him that they had to let their children follow their own dreams. Samuel went to school in Philadelphia and eventually returned to Arizona to help develop banking systems for the growing territory. Rose, however, loved ranching as much as her parents did. She could rope and ride as well as any cowboy, and she had a gift with horses that even exceeded Juliana's. When she was 20, she married a neighboring rancher's son named William, and together they started a horse breeding operation that became famous throughout the Southwest. David became a doctor, fulfilling a dream he had had since childhood when he watched the doctor save his mother's life during a difficult pregnancy. Grace, the baby, became a teacher like her Aunt Anna, opening a school on the ranch for the children of the workers and nearby families. As the children grew and started their own lives, Benjamin and Juliana found themselves with more time together, and they cherished it. They took trips, visiting San Francisco and Santa Fe, seeing the ocean for the first time, experiencing the world beyond Arizona. But they always came home to the ranch, to the place where they belonged. In 1910, when Benjamin was 52 and Juliana 47, Arizona was preparing for statehood. The territorial days were ending and a new era was beginning. They attended the celebrations in Casa Grande, now a thriving town with electric lights and automobiles, and marveled at how much the world had changed since that winter blizzard in 1884. "You ever miss the old days?" Juliana asked Benjamin one evening. They were grandparents now, with 11 grandchildren between their various children and great-grandparents to 2, thanks to Miguel's oldest daughter. "I miss my young knees and my straight back," Benjamin said with a laugh, though he was still strong and active for his age. "But no, I do not miss the old days. Every year with you has been better than the last." They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1911 with a huge party at the ranch, attended by family and friends from all over the territory. Miguel gave a toast, talking about how Benjamin had saved him and his sister, how Benjamin had been more of a father to him than many men were to their own children. Rose spoke about learning to be strong from her mother and fair from her father. Samuel, home from the East, talked about the legacy of kindness and hard work his parents had instilled in all their children. Juliana stood beside Benjamin, holding his hand, and felt overwhelmed by the love in the room. This was what they had built, not just a successful ranch but a family and a community based on respect and compassion, and the fundamental belief that every person had value and deserved to be treated with dignity. "When I was standing outside the Whitmore mansion in the cold, desperate and afraid, I never could have imagined this," Juliana said to Benjamin later, when the guests had gone and they were alone. "I never could have imagined being this happy, this loved, this blessed." "You deserved all of it," Benjamin said. "You always did. I am just grateful I got to be the one to show you." Arizona became a state in February 1912, and Benjamin and Juliana attended the ceremony in Phoenix, proud to be part of this historic moment. The territory they had helped settle and build was now officially part of the United States, and the wild frontier of their youth had become something more civilized, though still retaining the independent spirit that had drawn so many west. As they grew older, Benjamin and Juliana began to slow down, turning over more of the ranch operations to their children and grandchildren. But they never stopped working entirely, never stopped being part of the rhythm of ranch life. Benjamin could be found most mornings checking on the horses, And Juliana still kept her hand in the household management, though she had plenty of help now. They took to spending their evenings on the porch, watching the sunsets that still took their breath away, talking about their children and grandchildren, remembering the long road they had traveled together. Sometimes they were silent, content just to be in each other's presence, the decades of shared life making words unnecessary. One evening in the spring of 1921, when Benjamin was 63 and Juliana 60, they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the desert was coming alive with the cool of evening. "You remember what you said to me the night you proposed?" Juliana asked, her hand in Benjamin's. "I said a lot of things that night," Benjamin replied with a smile. "Most of them probably foolish and sentimental. You said you wanted to see if we could build something together," Juliana said. "Not as employer and employee, but as equals, as partners." "And did we?" Benjamin asked, though he knew the answer. "We did," Juliana said, gesturing to the ranch, the house, the family surrounding them. "We built all of this together. We built a life that mattered, that made a difference. We built love." Benjamin raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done that first night on the porch so many years ago. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said. "You are still the best decision I ever made. You are still my queen." "And you are still my cowboy," Juliana said, leaning into his embrace. "My partner, my love, my everything." They sat there as the stars came out, surrounded by the sound of their grandchildren's laughter, by the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into evening, by the deep peace that comes from a life well lived and love freely given. The winter that had made Juliana a servant was long gone, faded into memory. What remained was the enduring truth that Benjamin had made her a queen, not through wealth or status, but through love and respect, and the unwavering belief that she was worthy of both. And as the desert night wrapped around them and the stars blazed overhead, Juliana thought about that desperate young woman who had stood in the cold so many years ago, and she wished she could tell her that everything would be all right, that she would find love and family and a home, that she would be happy beyond her wildest dreams, that the hardship and the pain would give way to joy. But perhaps that young woman had known, somewhere deep inside. Perhaps that was why she had kept going, kept fighting, kept believing that there was something better ahead. And she had been right. There had been something better. There had been Benjamin. There had been this life. There had been love that transformed everything. "I would live it all again," Juliana said quietly. "Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear. I would live it all again because it brought me here to you, to this." "As would I," Benjamin said, his arms tightening around her. "1,000 times over I would choose you. I would choose us. I would choose this life we have built together." They sat there until the moon rose high and bright, casting silver light across the desert, across the ranch that was their legacy, across the life they had made together. A life built on kindness offered and accepted, on love given and returned, on two people who had seen past circumstances and status to the true worth of each other. Winter had made her a servant, broken and desperate and alone. But a cowboy had made her a queen, beloved and respected and cherished. And together they had built something that would outlast them both. A family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages. The desert wind whispered through the mesquite trees, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows to come, each one a gift, each one precious, each one another chapter in the beautiful story of Benjamin and Juliana Easton, partners in every sense of the word, now and forever.